Here in Deuteronomy, we're going to be looking at some of the dietary animals, whether they are clean or unclean. And then we're going to follow that up with looking at the tithing system. Deuteronomy 14:1. You are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves or make any baldness on your foreheads for the dead. The people of Israel, they are dedicated to the Lord. God is their God and they are his people. And he does not want them to do the things of the people around them, what the idolatrous heathens are doing. Cutting of the flesh, this would be cutting themselves for funerals or in the worship of their idols or in a traumatic circumstance. We also see the forbidding of the shaving of the head, causing the baldness here. This particular form was also something that the idolatrous people in the area were doing. These types of practices are defacing the body, and of course the body is a holy thing. So that's why they are forbidden. We know what the worship of the Lord is when it comes to the different offerings, but when it comes to funeral rites or times of sorrow or intense events, we typically see the Israelite putting on sackcloth and ashes. Maybe one, maybe the other, maybe both at the same time. So the sackcloth is cloth that is used to make sacks, like a bag that you would put flour or grain in. So it's not something designed for comfort, so it's a pretty harsh fabric. And the ashes, when placed on the skin, make the skin really itchy. So it was just a way of making themselves miserable on the outward appearance to show what they were feeling inside. Deuteronomy 14:2. For you are a holy people, set apart to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a particular people to himself, above all the nations of the earth. 14:3. You shall not eat anything that is abominable to the Lord, and so forbidden by him. So the people of Israel, they are to be holy, they are to be called out by the Lord and separated from the rest of the world. So now we're going to look at some of the dietary restrictions that the Israelites are going to have to follow to maintain a clean state. Some of this is obviously done as a method of separating the people of Israel from those around them. If they cannot share food together, it would be much more difficult to have relations. The second portion is perhaps a health benefit, that eating some of these meats, maybe if they're not prepared correctly, can have longevity concerns or parasites that may drastically shorten lifespans. Deuteronomy 14:4. These are the beasts which you may eat, the ox, the sheep, and the goat. 14:5. The hart, the gazelle, the roebuck, the wild goat, the ibex, the antelope, and the mountain sheep. It's a much smaller list, the things that they are allowed to eat versus those that they are not. So maybe that's why we're starting with this. Also, the domestically raised animals, typically they can be offered to the Lord as offerings, whereas those animals that are considered clean but are wild game, they are not allowed to be offered. Deuteronomy 14:6. And every beast that parts the hoof and has it divided into two and brings up and chews the cud among the beasts, you may eat. So first we have examples of animals that are clean, and now we have a system in place for determining whether an animal is clean or not, outside of those that are named. And what is the criteria of what makes a clean animal? So here we have the hoof, and that is divided into two. This is something that is better to be observed when looking at pictures of the feet of animals. We also have the chewing of the cud. Now that is when an animal eats the food, chews it, swallows it, it gets kind of partially digested, then they regurgitate it and then chew it again and then digest it again. Maybe they do that multiple times, but it is something that needs to be done when it comes to the processing of some of the grassier foods that they would typically eat, or grains that they would eat. Plant matter, let's go with that. Of course, this means that all the animals that they would be eating, at least when it comes to the land animals, they are the ones that are eating the plant matter. They are not the omnivores, they are not the carnivores. There's probably some reason or some logic to this that probably makes a lot of sense. Sometimes even the feed for animals can cause problems for the humans that eat them as well. I remember years ago when they had the big epidemic of mad cow disease. This was a disease that cows got after the consumption of meat and bone meal, often from other cattle. So almost a form of cannibalism. And it was a neurological disease that would cause death, and it could affect the meat of these animals so that the humans that consume these animals could also be affected by it and die as a result. A pretty scary thing. Deuteronomy 14:7. Yet these you shall not eat, of those that chew the cud, or have the hoof split in two, the camel, the hare, and the coney, because they chew the cud, but divide not the hoof. They are unclean for you. So the rules for determining whether or not an animal is clean or not are not a set of what we would say in computer science or statements that it only needs to fulfill one of the aspects, but they are and statements that both of them have to be true for the outcome to be clean. So the animal, if it chews to cud but it doesn't have the right hoof, well, it's no good. It's not clean. The inverse is also true. So if they have the right hoof but they don't chew the cud. Deuteronomy 14:8. And the swine, because it parts the hoof but does not chew the cud, it is unclean to you. You shall not eat of their flesh or touch their dead bodies. So not only are they forbidden from consuming these animals and eating them, they are also forbidden from touching their dead bodies. And this makes a lot of sense. When things die, things grow, and maybe there's bugs or other things that are just not a good thing to be interacted with. So they would certainly be cleaner by not touching these dead animals. Deuteronomy 14:9. These you may eat of all that are in the waters. Whatever has fins and scales you may eat. So now that we have seen the land animals, it is now time to look at the animals of the sea creatures. Deuteronomy 14:10. And whatever has not fins and scales you may not eat. It is unclean for you. When it comes to determining whether or not the sea creatures are clean or unclean, it all comes down to the fins and the scales. And this is a very restricted category of foods, and many signature dishes of many different countries are not clean, such as the jellied eel of England or the takoyaki in Japan, which is made from octopus in a batter that is fried into a ball. Squid ink pasta in Italy, and many types of gumbo in the States use shellfish, and shellfish, of course, are not clean. I asked AI what some examples of the common clean fish are that they would be able to eat, and it came up with salmon, tuna, trout, cod, herring, and tilapia. So there are some definite good fish there, but it just seems that most of the seafood, or most of the iconic seafood, is not permitted. This could be an extension of that system of segregation to separate the Israelites from the rest of the world. Deuteronomy 14:11. Of all clean birds you may eat. 14:12. But these are the ones which you shall not eat: the eagle, the vulture, the osprey. So now it's time for the birds, and we see that there is a list here of the types of birds that they are not allowed to eat. And the ones that we're starting off with are animals that are eating dead flesh, so the carrion eater type birds, and that makes a lot of sense. You can get very sick eating these types of birds. So it would make sense that they would be unclean. Deuteronomy 14:13. The buzzard, the kite, in its several species. 14:14. The raven in all its species. 14:15. The ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, the hawk of any variety. So we see scavenger birds, and we also see predator birds as well as apex predator birds, that they are on the list of forbidden birds to consume. I don't imagine that they would taste very good, and it would probably make sense that they would be unclean animals, because they could probably pick up parasites from the things that they eat as well. 14:16. The little owl, the great owl, the horned owl. 14:17. The pelican, the carrion vulture, the cormorant. 14:18. The stork, the heron of any variety, the hoppy, and the bat. So there certainly is a large number of birds that are banned. Of course, the carrion eaters and the birds of prey. But as far as what is actually consumable, I looked it up, and it looks like we got chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, and pigeons. Some of the examples of birds that they would be able to consume. Deuteronomy 14:19. And all flying insects are unclean for you. They shall not be eaten. 14:20. But of all clean winged things you may eat. So there is a restriction on the consumption of these flying bugs. In the book of Leviticus, we do see a section in chapter 11 where it mentions some bugs that are available for consumption, in particular a type of locusts. And we see John the Baptist eating locusts in the New Testament. The plural for locust is loci. And for that second part there, of course, the clean birds, the ones that aren't mentioned here in this list, that they are able to consume them. Deuteronomy 14:21. You shall not eat of anything that dies of itself. You may give it to the stranger or the foreigner who is within your towns, that he may eat it, or you may sell it to an alien. They are not under God's law in this manner, but you are a people holy to the Lord your God. You shall not even boil a kid in its mother's milk. So they are not allowed to eat an animal that has died on its own. This is typically standard practice nowadays. But back then, this was probably quite radical, and was probably something that the nations around them, when they saw Israel doing this, they probably wondered what the deal was. And we see here that the Israelite, they're allowed to give this meat away, or they are allowed to sell it to those that are not Israelites, that they can have it and they can do with it whatever they want. So the restriction was only on the Israelite from consumption of this dead animal meat. We also see mention here of boiling a kid in its mother's milk. Now, the Israelites interpreted this as not consuming the meat of an animal with something meant to nourish an animal. Whether this was always the way it was, or if this is a modern interpretation, make of that what you will. Certainly an interesting rule. Deuteronomy 14:22. You shall surely tithe all the yield of your seed produced by your field each year. So what we have being described here is what is often referred to as the second tithe. The one that we saw previously back in the book of Numbers, that was a different type of tithe than this one here. The first tithe was used to look after the Levites, where they would give 1/10 of their annual produce or agricultural produce to the tribe of Levi, the tribe that had no inheritance in the land, so they needed help from the other tribes to survive to a certain extent. Let's go a little bit further. Deuteronomy 14:23. And you shall eat before the Lord your God in the place in which he will cause his name and presence to dwell, the tithe, 10th, of your grain, your new wine, your oil, and the firstling of your herd and your flock, that you may learn reverently to fear the Lord your God always. So the second tithe relates to the different feast days and the celebrations, the holy days. We see that they are to bring this portion, this tithe portion, and then they consume it in the presence of the Lord. So when they go to the feast, then they consume this portion of the grain, of the wine, of the oil, and maybe they bring some animals as offerings as well. Deuteronomy 14:24. And if the distance is too long for you to carry your tithe, or the place where the Lord your God chooses to set his name and presence is too far away from you, when the Lord your God has blessed you, 14:25, then you shall turn it into money, and bind up the money in your hand, and shall go to the place of worship which the Lord your God has chosen. 14:26. And you may spend that money for whatever your appetite craves, for oxen, or sheep, or new wine, or stronger drink, or whatever you desire. And you shall eat there before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice, you and your household. So I'm sure the logistics of moving around in Israel are going to be quite challenging, especially when they first take possession of the land. And even down the road, when they actually make some roads and can actually have reliable trade routes, even then, moving with a lot of these things, the different animals and grains and things, it would be quite complicated and could be quite tedious. So we have an alternative here that they can sell these things and then bring the money to the celebration. And then when they get to the celebration, they can go and purchase the things that they would like to eat with the Lord. And that's a pretty cool system. Deuteronomy 14:27. And you shall not forsake or neglect the Levite, God's minister, in your towns, for he has been given no share or inheritance with you. So when we looked at the first tithe, it was to look after the Levites. And here we have an additional reference to the Levites and the idea of not forsaking them, not abandoning them, but looking after the Levites. Deuteronomy 14:28. At the end of every 3 years you shall bring forth all the tithe of your increase the same year, and lay it up within your towns. 14:29. And the Levite, because he has no part or inheritance with you, and the stranger or temporary resident, and the fatherless and the widow, who are in your towns, shall come and eat and be satisfied, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands that you do. So here we have mention of a third type of tithing. This is the poor man's tithe. This is to look after those who we saw here in this list of people that are going through hard times, and they need to be supported. And God likes to support those who are weak and less fortunate. So they would bring this portion of goods to the town center, and they would leave them there all set up, and they'd go and return home. And the people who are disadvantaged, they can go there and they can take, and they can be sustained.